All right, Swift Squad, this is Prof G, and what you're seeing is a final exams review solution, so it doesn't have the polish of most of my other videos, but you're welcome to pause at each of the questions and check things out. Students completed the exam in the 2.5 period class time in their laptops. They couldn't use old code. They couldn't access the internet, just help that's included inside of Xcode. They could bring a single sheet, double-sided list with any notes that they wanted to put on top of that, code examples or things like that. And the reason we specify this is we want to make sure that our students are decently prepared for code interviews. Inspiration is mentioned here. So Janelle Nanos, who is a journalist of the Boston Globe, and she teaches at BC. She's a wonderful person, tweeted something very funny. I thought that she wanted to open up a line of casual restaurants called GuacChain. So I thought that would be really funny, especially if they only accepted cryptocurrency. So the idea behind the final exam is that the students are going to have to build an app for the GuacChain restaurant, and that the rollout is going to happen in the US, in Great Britain, and in the Eurozone. So they've got to do currency conversions as well. They're going to use the CoinDesk API to get the current price per dollar of Bitcoin, and they can also use that to convert to the other currencies as well, because they have a price per Bitcoin of the other currencies too. And you'll get some resources, so you can have an icon for this. You saw that there was a splash screen, and as you change the values, you can see the value expressed both in the current selection here, which is US dollars, as well as in Bitcoin. Again, that data comes from the Coinbase API. So if I say I want 3 tacos here, that's $15. Another $8 for the burritos. Crypto chips are $3, and a couple of horchatas, those are $2. So there's your date night meal. And if you're in Britain, currently that's going to be about 25 pounds. And in euros, that's going to be, we have almost parity between the dollar and the euro when I'm recording this. So this is what it's going to look like when it's done. It's all laid out in SwiftUI. Let's go ahead and get building. So for questions 1 and 2, and again, if you're following along and you want to take this test on your own, feel free to pause as each of the questions is presented if you want to reach them, or if you want to read through them a little more thoroughly. But for part 1, you need to download the resources that are at this particular URL, bit.ly/guac-chain, all lowercase. And the launch screen is in an asset called launch screen. There are actually 3 assets in there of the 3 different sizes. And the icon is taco-1024 by 1024. And also you should set up the name of the restaurant, GuacChain, centered at the top of the app. Guac should be in green, red, chain should be in red. The font should be market felt. The size should be 48 and bold. You want to limit the appearance so it doesn't increase for more than 1 line. So it's going to be restricted to 1 line. And you should also make sure that you can reduce the text size if you need to by up to 50%. So we'll go ahead and build this first part. So create a new Xcode project. It's a SwiftUI project. Name it GuacChain. Then we'll head to the URL that I've given you. We'll highlight all of the files that are in here, right-click, and download these. Once these are downloaded, let's head to the Assets catalog, and we'll first click on App Icon. This is the folder with the items downloaded, so I'm going to click on the Tacos 1024 by 1024 and drag it right into the 1024 by 1024 box in App Icon. Then I'll highlight and grab the 3 launch screens and drag those into the Asset catalog. Then I'll head to my project icon, the top icon in my project navigator, and I'll make sure that I'm clicked on Targets and then Info. Find the item in the list of different options here that says launch screen. Click the expansion triangles. If you have a UI launch screen in here, you can delete that, but you don't need to. Over here on the right of this launch screen cell, I'm going to click on the little circle with the plus in it. I'm going to select image name, and then over here in the cell on the right side, I'm going to double click, and I'm going to type in launch screen, all one word, all lowercase. That's the same way it was spelled in my asset catalog. Then I'll click on a plus circle again, then find and select image respect safe area insets, and over here on the right-hand side, make sure that it says yes. No is default, but you want yes. Then if you select the correct scheme, I'm going to do this on an iPhone 14 Pro, build and run. You should see your launch screen show up, and if you click on home, you should see the icon show up as well. So question 1 done. Now let's head over to the content view where we can create our red and green GuacChain. I'll delete what's inside the VStack, and to get the red and green next to each other, we're going to add an HStack, open and close curlies. First text view says guac, second text view says chain. Then I'll set my font below the HStack so it impacts both of these with the dot font. I'm going to pass in capital F font and select dot custom as the option. This lets you put in a string for the name of the font and a size for the font. We mentioned we should use the marker felt font. It should be size 48, although make sure that marker and felt has a space between them. You want to get the caps right too. I'll put a spacer below this to push the GuacChain up top, and we'll put a .foreground color modifier passing in .green, that's under Guac, and then under chain, .foreground color passing in .red. And down below the H stack, we'll add a .bold modifier too. For question number 4, we're going to have text underneath this that says world's tastiest tacos, but we only accept Bitcoin, so I'm going to highlight this and copy it so that I can use this exact phrase. That's right under GuacChain. It should be in papyrus font, 20 point, with a center alignment. So under the H stack and its modifiers, I'll say text and paste in the string that I just copied. Underneath this, we'll add a .font modifier. Again, we're going to pass in capital F font.custom. Select the option with the string and the font size. The string is going to be papyrus for making sure that you spell it right with a capital P, and the size is going to be 20. Now we also want to center this, so we use .multiline text alignment passing in .center. And oh yeah, I remember we forgot something from the first question, or the second question, second and third questions. We want to make sure that the line limit is limited to 1, and that we also set our .minimum scale factor to 0.5. Then below this, above the spacer, we'll add another text modifier, and the string we're going to pass in is going to be the taco emoji. The way that you get that is hold down Control, Command, and Space Bar, and we can search for the word taco up here. I'll double click on that taco so that it's in there. That's a tiny taco. We want it much bigger. So there are a bunch of different ways we can do this. I'll just say .font and pass in capital font .custom. I'll pass in the straight up system font, and I'll set the font size to 80. Looking good. So for question 5, we want to create something that looks like this. So there's going to be a label over here, but you can see, okay, if I've got these items that are organized horizontally, we want an H stack, and then this string here, this text view is above our stepper, so that involves a V stack. So we're going to start with an H stack, and then we're going to have a V stack inside it after we put in the text view here. So this label is a text view here on the left. We have the default value of 0. We're going to change that though, and the font should be the system font, 48, heavy weight, and we want to put this in a frame with a width of 70. And by doing that, we're going to make sure that things don't bounce around as we go from the minimum 0 to the maximum of 99. Now, also we want to add a label up here that has the first of 4 menu item names in here. So this is a Satoshi Takamoto. Satoshi Nakamoto is apparently the guy who created Bitcoin coin, the legendary guy. At least it's a pseudonym. We don't really know who that is. I guess he's never been officially revealed, or some say he has. Who knows? But we're going to set this so that the title is 2. Then below this, we're going to have a stepper, and this is going to have a stepper selection item of QTY. So we're going to need to create a variable for this. It's got to be a state variable in here. We're not going to have a visible title, so the steppers allow you to select a title. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass in an empty string, or it doesn't matter, but I give you a hint down here. If you add .label is hidden underneath your stepper, you're going to be able to get rid of the label. So that'll just allow us to push everything over to the left-hand side once we properly set our alignment for the V stack that we have here. So stepper should have value between 0 and 99, so we're going to set that as a range specifically, so we don't want to go between below 0 or above 99. And pressing the stepper should also change the value of the 0 in here. So we want to take whatever we're using for the stepper value, that's the QTY, and we want to push that into here, and we want to convert that value, which is going to be an integer, into a string. Now notice that the stepper and the text are left justified. There's no spacing in between here too, so those are things that we're going to set on our VStack modifiers. And we also want to limit the text so that all of the text, the quantity, and the name of the food item won't appear on more than 1 line, so our line limit should be 1 there. And we also want to set our minimum scale factor to 50% too, so we can shrink these things down. So let's set those up. So we'll start with an H stack, and we'll put a text view inside. We'll pass in the string 0, although we'll change that. And then we'll set our .font. And here's just to show you yet another way to set the system font. If I set .system in here, I can select an option that has size. When I press return, I can enter the size that I want to use. That's going to be 48. Then I'll set the .font weight, passing in .heavy, and I'll set a .frame. If I start to type in W for width, I can select the option to add just the width when I press return, and I'll pass in 70 for that. Then I'm going to add a VStack below this, and for the text inside that, I'm just going to copy my string Satoshi Takamoto and paste that in. I'll set the font to title 2, and then below this, I'm going to add the stepper. Lots of different options in here, and it looks like they all have titles or labels. I'm going to select this one here with the title, the value, and in, and I can see down here that the in has that closing range, so those are definitely the 3 options that I want. I'm going to press return, although actually I only want 2 of the 3 options, so the first part here, we want to get rid of the label. We're going to pass in an empty string, but we also need to hide the label as well. So I'll put in an empty string, then I'll tab over to value, Remember, we need to create a value for this. So up top, we'll say @state private var, qty is what we're supposed to call this, and we'll set that equal to 0. Then what I can do down here is in the HStack where I had the string 0, I can replace that with string interp qty. And then down here for the value, remember this has got to be a binding value. So I'll put in $qty in here to grab the value that the user changes for the stepper. Then I'll tab over to in. This wants the closed range of the values of the stepper. So I'll just say 0, 99. And this works when I click on plus and minus. I can't go below 0 as well. This is fine, but we want to hide our label. That's why we're pushed all the way over to the right in here. And the question specifically mentioned you should do this, so below the stepper we'll say .label is hidden. Now this centers things nicely, but remember we want them left justified, so I'm going to add parentheses in the parameter alignment : .leading in the VStack. And I also mentioned that we want to set the spacing to 0, so that's another parameter, comma, spacing, : passing in 0. And we see things look good. Remember the last two things that we need to do, so below the HStack we'll say .line limit passing in 1 and .minimum scale factor passing in 0.5. Question 5 done. For question 6, we want to make sure that you can use a view as a subview in a separate file. It's good for organization, and that you also know how to use binding values to link that back to the parent file. So we're going to create a separate SwiftUI view called qty selection view. So you can copy that, and we're going to cut and paste the code from the content view into the new qty selection view. The view qty selection view should have two parameters. So a bound value, remember we use @binding for that. That's going to be qty. We don't initialize this value because we're going to be passing the value in when we call it, but this is going to be used as the stepper view value. We currently have that set up. We just need to make sure that we create the proper value for it. And we do need to set up a menu text. So we haven't set that up yet. And this doesn't need to be passed back. So we don't have to create this as a state value or a binding value. We can just use var for this, and we're going to use menu text and replace the Satoshi Nakamoto bit that we have in there. And then we should do everything that we need to in order to display the view in the preview provider. So remember, since we're working with binding views, we need to use a .constant in there for the binding value. But we saw in our videos, once we do that, we're going to lose the ability to interact in here. And I remind you about that just so that if you're not really concerned. But we will be able to lay things out properly. And if for some reason you couldn't get this done, I gave you a way to work around that so you can continue to work and just lose points for this particular area. So let's go ahead and set this up. So let's create that new file below the content view. I'll right click on content view, select new file. This is going to be a SwiftUI view. Name this qty selection view, then head to content view and highlight the whole HStack that we just created that have those 3 views in it for handling the stepper. Cut that out, head back to qty selection view, and we'll highlight the text that's in the body and we'll paste in the HStack with its 2 modifiers. Now we'll get some errors here. We need to create a couple of variables. The first one is a bound variable, so use @binding var qty : int. So we're going to declare this, but we're not going to initialize it because the value that's going to initialize this is going to be coming from the content view. And then underneath that, we're going to add our menu string, and this does not have to be a state variable or a binding value since it's not changing, and it shouldn't have to trigger a SwiftUI user interface redraw. So we'll just say var menu string : string. Now down here for the text, for the Satoshi Nakamoto, I'm going to highlight that and cut that out. And then I'm just going to type in menu string in here. And we're getting an error down here in the preview provider. So we'll backspace over this, and we can see now that the quantity selection view wants a quantity and a menu string. Now, if I try to put in a quantity in here, like the constant 4, we'll see that doesn't work. I'm going to tab over to the menu string. I'm going to paste in what I cut out, the Satoshi Nakamoto. Now the error we get is we can't pass a value in as a binding. We need to use a constant. So I'm going to say for quantity .constant and pass in a 0. And I know that seems really weird because the 4 was a constant, but you have to use .constant in here. And also, as I warned you about in the question, but you should have experience with this from the previous apps that we've built, when you use .constant, that will make it not interactive. So we can see if we click on minus and plus in here, that just the view that we're seeing in our live preview here is not going to be interactive, but we can still use this for layout purposes. And this is looking pretty good. So why don't we head back to our content view and we'll create a VStack above the spacer, and we'll enter qty selection view. And again, that wants a quantity and a menu string. So we need to create some quantity variables in here, and I give you the names that you should use for those. Those should all be state variables. So we'll create them up top. First, I can rename the quantity variable, the QTY variable. We use that in our quantity selection view. I'll call that now taco quantity or taco QTY. Then I'll highlight and copy this line and paste it down 3 times. And change the bottom 3 variables to burrito quantity, chips quantity, and horchata quantity. Then I'll pass in $taco quantity as the first QTY variable in the menu string. I'm just going to copy that from my exam and paste it in the Satoshi Takamoto. Then I can highlight and copy this call to quantity selection view, paste it in 3 more times below. Change the last 3 quantity variables to $burrito quantity, $chips quantity, and $horchata quantity. And I'll head back to the exam and copy Bitcoin burrito, paste it in. The next one I remember is crypto chips. And I'll copy no bubble horchata, pasting that in. Now this is starting to look good, but it needs to be left aligned. So after the VStack, I'm going to add parentheses and then alignment : with dot leading as the parameter I'm passing in here. And we can test this out. We can add 3 tacos, 1 burrito, 1 crypto chip, 2 no bubble horchatas, and this is working perfectly. Nice work. Now we're on to question 8. So we're going to create 2 enums in the content view. One enum should be named currency. It should hold string raw values. The 3 values should be USD, GBP, and EUR. And these are the 3 value strings. It should be the raw value for those 3 cases. And I also tell you how you can go ahead and type or otherwise enter in the pound symbol and the euro symbol. The second enum should be named price. Again, capital P. Since it's an enum, it's a type. It should be double raw values. Taco, burrito, chips, and horchata are the 3 cases, and the prices should be $5, $8, $3, and $2. No $sign in there. We'll just enter them in as doubles. And you don't have to have .00. They could be just .0, or you could even declare them as 5, 8, 3, and 2, since you're declaring this as double as the raw values that you'll enter. So you can enter these enums inside or outside of the struct. I didn't tell you what to do, so I'm going to enter mine outside the struct. It really doesn't matter for our case here. So I'm going to say enum. The first one is currency with a capital C. Then we'll say colon. This is going to be of type string. We also want to say comma case iterable, open and close curlies. And our cases are going to be USD equals, it's going to be $USD. And the next one's case GBP equals, and I'll just put in an empty string, case euro. I'll put in an empty string as well. And I'm just going to copy the strings from my text and paste them in. So that's our first enum. Let's create our second one with enum. This one's called price, capital P, colon, and this is going to be a double, open and close curlies. We won't need to iterate on this, so I don't need a case iterable. And we'll say case taco equals 5.00, although really we don't need the 0.00 in there because we've already declared it as the double. Then case burrito equals 8, case chips equals 3, and case horchata equals 2. So that's both enums. On to the next question. So after the VStack holding the quantity views, add a spacer and then a picker controller. The picker selection should be stored in a value named currency selection. So we're gonna have to create that. It should hold a value of currency type, the enum that we just created. The default value should be the USD case of the currency type. The picker should have the segmented picker style. So again, you might remember we did picker styles in class, and segmented will show picker style just like this. And if you forgot how to do that, if you just enter a dot modifier down below and start to type in picker style, you'll see the picker style shows up, and you can say dot segmented. And you want to use your currency enum to iterate over the 3 different options that we have for the segmented picker, and a working picker should look like the one that we see up here. Now also for point 4, or for option 10 down here, we want to create a string named symbol. Initially it should be set to $, which is the first symbol that we see that's associated with the first selection, the default selection in our picker here. That's going to be the USD option. But when the currency selection changes, so when you click on any of the other items, we want to get the symbol for that selection and place it in symbol. So if you click here, it should be the pound symbol, and you click here, it should be the euro symbol. Click here, it should go back to the $ symbol. Then before we scroll down, why don't we create our currency selection value? So we'll say at state private var currency selection colon, that's of enum type capital C currency. currency, and that equals .usd. And I'm sorry there's a jump cut in here. I had to go back and record a portion of this because I think I forgot to unpause. But I'll scroll down here, and just after the spacer, we'll type in picker. Let's select the option with title, selection, and content, although we're not going to use the title, so when we press return, we can put an empty string in for title. The selection is going to be $currency selection, and we'll press return for the trailing closure. Then inside, we'll say for each. We can select the option with data, ID, and content. The data is just going to be capital C currency. Remember, that's our enum, and we want to iterate through this, so we'll say .all cases. ID is \self, tab over, press return, and we can pass in what we call this currency. And then inside, we'll put in a text view, passing in currency.rawValue. Now we see this as the default picker type, but we don't want this. We want a segmented picker type. And again, back from the jump cut. Again, sorry about that, but the code is all the same. But let's change the picker style. So underneath the closing curly for the picker itself, we'll say .picker style, select .segmented. We see now we get the segmented picker. Now we can click on these, and remember what we want to do. When we click on them, we also want to put in the appropriate symbol in a variable called symbol. So let's head up top and create that variable. We'll say @state private var symbol equals, and by default we'll put in the string $. Then down below, if we want to respond to a change in the picker, well, just below the picker style modifier, I'll enter .onChange. And we're going to do of and the new value in here. The of will just be the currency selection. So when the currency selection changes, meaning a button on the currency selector, or on the picker, I should say, has been pressed, and we'll press return for trailing closure format. Down below, we'll say symbol equals, and since we're not going to use new value, I can put an underscore in here, although it doesn't really matter. And symbol equals, it'll be currency selection .rawValue .prefix. I can select this option with a max length, and I'm going to pass in a 1. And why don't we see if this works? So I'm going to type in print and in parentheses symbol in here. So if this works, if we click on the different segments, we should see $, pound sign, or euro symbol. Now we can't even try this out, and we're getting an error in here. And the reason why is this is giving us a single character back. So it's assuming that this is a character, but we can easily convert this to a string. Remember, there's a Swift data type called character, and we don't want that. We want this to be a string. I'll set this equal to a string with a string interp inside, and then I'll highlight my whole currency selection through prefix 1, cut that out, and paste that into the string interp, and the error goes away. Now, if we build and run, you can see down in the console behind this, if I click on the different segments, I'm printing out the appropriate symbol. This is working great, but that was a little tricky with the prefix in here, but there are plenty of different ways you could do this. It was totally fine if you use this technique. Let me comment out my symbol equals line up here, and then down below, I'll simply say switch currency selection, open and close curlies, case.usd colon, and then we'll say symbol equals the string $, case.gbp, symbol equals, and I can paste in a pound symbol from down here, case.eur, symbol equals empty string, but I'll copy and paste the euro symbol from down below as well. And I'm getting errors in here because I forgot to put the colons at the end of the case statements. I'll do that now. Then when we build and run, we see this works fine. So again, if I didn't specify a particular technique to use, you could use any of these techniques, but I did want to show you that you could accomplish this with a one-liner. Now let's head back to the exam, and we're on question number 11. So what we want to do is create a text view containing the string total. This should be in font title. To the right of the total, we want to add 2 views, so we can see this is all in an H stack, and then this must be in a V stack here, one on top of the other. We can see that these are left aligned. The top text view should hold the value of the order bill calculated in Bitcoin, which we're going to complete in a few questions below. So we just want to set up this text view here. It should include the Bitcoin symbol with a followed by a space, and we can just put in some 0.00 in here in a text for now, but we'll change this to the actual Bitcoin value in a bit. And I describe how you can get the Bitcoin value, but you can also just copy and paste this right from the exam. And then below the Bitcoin total, we're going to put the total in whatever currency that we have, whatever was selected in the picker, so we know that that goes into the symbol variable. And this should change when the picker is clicked, and we click on the different segments in here. It should be followed by a space, and we're eventually going to put the calculated bill in here, but for now you can just put in the string 0.00. And when complete, the question should look something like what you see down below here. And we can see when the euro is selected, the euro will show up. Up here it shows when the pound is selected, the pound shows up. So let's go ahead and build this. Under the onChange modifier that's attached to the picker, we'll say hstack, open and close curlies. This will have a text field with the text total, colon, and that's going to be .font at .title. Then I'll add a VStack, open and close curlies, with 2 text views. I'll put in empty strings at first. In the lower one, I'll actually put in a string interp and then a space. The symbol is in the string interp. And for the one above that, I'll just copy the Bitcoin symbol, paste it in here, and add a space. And if I test this in the live preview, I can see the symbol is updating. Nice. Now after the HStack, I'm also going to add parentheses and an alignment parameter set to .top, and we can see now both the text field with the title in it and the VStack are aligned to the top of the view that they're inside of, which is great. And I'll just add some placeholder text in here, 0 dot and a bunch of extra zeros for the Bitcoin and 0.00 for the currency text after the symbol. We'll put in real variables for those via a function call toward the end of the exam. But what this shows me is I need to align my VStack, so I'm going to add an alignment parameter in front of the VStack here and put a .leading value in front of that. Much better. This is the look I'm going for. Up next, it's time to work with the API. So we're first going to create a view model named currency view model, and this is going to be the file for our view model where we're going to make the API call for the JSON, return and parse the data. So we should create a class that's called currency view model and do whatever is necessary so that we can see this in the content view. We should refer to the variable as currency VM, and we should also do whatever is necessary to make sure that when the code is executed, we don't see the dreaded purple errors that can occur if we execute code outside the main thread. So back in Xcode, let's create that view model. I'm going to make it right underneath my app file here. So I'm going to click on GuacChain.app, right-click on it, and select New File. This is going to be a Swift file, not a SwiftUI view. We'll call this currency view model. I copied it, so I'm just going to paste it right in here. Then for our currency view model, we'll say class currency view model, upper camel case, colon, and this is always going to be an observable object, open and close curlies. Observable object will make sure that we can add published properties in here that can be seen by other views in the app, and to make sure we don't get those purple errors, we'll add an @main actor up top above the class statement. Now, in order to make sure we can use this, we need to create an object from this observable object class that we just created. We could set it up as an environment object, but we actually don't need to do that since we're only going to use it on one view. So let's head over to content view, and what we can do here is in either case, we need to create the first instance of an object from our observable object class as a state object. So right underneath the content view here, since that's the only place where we'll need it, I'll say @StateObject var, call this currency VM, and we'll set it equal to currency view model, open and close curlies. So that goes to the class blueprint of currency view model and creates an object from it called currency VM. And now we can refer to that in the content view. Now let's head back to that currency view model and see what else we need to do. So for question number 13, we create a string called URL string, which is what we've typically been using in our course when we access an API. We're going to set this equal to this particular URL. We've got 3 published properties in here that hold the value of the Bitcoin values. So this is what we want to create, published values that are going to have these 3 names. They should all be of type double. And then we're going to create a working getData function. So if you open your browser to this particular URL that we're going to access with our URL string, we can see the structure of the JSON that we have here. So right at the first level, we don't have any arrays in here, but we do have another struct, which is called, let's see, in here, it's BPI. And then we want to be able to access a struct called USD and rate float. We also need to grab GBP and rate float and EUR and rate float. And all of our variables need to have the same names as the keys that we see in here. So BPI is going to be lowercase, the USD, the GBP, and the EUR are going to be uppercase, and each of these has rate float inside them, but they're in separate structures, so you can do that. Once we get and parse these values, then we want to make sure that we put them in our published value so that they are visible in our content view. Now I give you some hints in here, so I tell you specifically, hey, this is the struct that you should be looking at, and create any data structures that are necessary inside the current view model to be able to access these. Again, you've got lots of experience now with JSON. We've done this at least 3 times to be able to access different types of data in exercises and learning examples and in the Pokemon example that we did as well. And what we want to do is when we run the getData function, we want to print out that the Bitcoin is currently worth the dollar value, the pound value, and the euro value, which is what we're getting in here. Note that these are doubles. And We also want to make sure that we can call this. So I've seen some students, and I explicitly remind you to do this. Hey, we want to set up the getData function so that it's called from the content view when things first load. So hopefully you remember that you can do that either with .onAppear and capital T task, or even better with lowercase .t task in there, calling getData on the content VM object that we just created. And if you still couldn't get that to work, we said, hey, you'd lose points on this one, but you can hard code some constants and work through the rest of it with these particular values. So let's go ahead and build this. So back in the currency view model, I've actually copied the 3 different variable names that I should use. So I'm going to paste them in here, and each of these need to be published variables. So I'll say app published var in front of USB per BTC, set that equal to 0.0, and I'll do the same with the other values. So we've got our 3 published values in here. They're declared and they're initialized to 0.0. And just to remind you, this is the JSON that we're looking at. So you can see at the first level here, we have BPI, then we have USD, GBP, and EUR in there. And we want to get the rate float value, which is a double value. So let's start. We need to create 3 structs as part of this. I'm going to add them above my published properties here. And I'll work backwards from the innermost structure. So I'll say struct capital USD :codable, open and close curlies. In this variable, I'm just going to head over here and make sure that I copy the rate underscore float so that it's named properly, paste it in, and that's :double is what I declare it as. Then I'm going to copy this whole struct and paste it twice below. And then I'll just change the second struct name to GBP and the third one to EUR. So now I've got my 3 innermost structs. And now I need to create the struct above this with struct BPI :codable, open and close curlies. And inside here, we're going to say var lowercase USD :uppercase USD, var lowercase GBP :uppercase GBP, and var lowercase EUR :uppercase EUR. But if I do that, no, my friends, that's not going to work out. I need to make sure that I have these in uppercase as well. So I need to change the USD, GBP, and EUR to uppercase. Remember, I need to make sure that my variable names match my key names in the JSON exactly. And if you used a different name for the name of the structs, that's totally fine. I could have called them anything. Swift does allow you to use the same name for variables and for structs in here. It's smart enough to know the difference of the case or context to when this is used. But I could have just as easily called the USD underscore struct or USD struct. Anything like that would have been fine. And now let's create that topmost struct. So I'm going to say struct. And why don't we call that capital R result, :codable, open and close curlies, and this is going to be var. It's lowercase BPI here, so make sure you get your cases right. And uppercase BPI is what I call this struct. And if I take a look at the JSON, this looks perfect. So now let's make sure we set up a string that we can use for our URL. So we say var URL string equals, say empty string in here, but I'll just head over to my browser and copy the working string right from the browser. You could have copied it from the exam, paste it in between the double quotes here, and we're ready to start building getData. Now, we're not doing anything fancy in here. We don't have page JSON. We don't have any flags that we need for a progress view. So we'll just start out with func getData, open close parentheses, async, open and close curlies, and this is going to be set up exactly like all of the other getData functions that we've used previously. So I like to start out with print, and then in quotes I say, we are accessing the URL string interp, and I put URL string in here. It's just nice to have this printed out to the console, and I always add a spiderweb emoji in front of this so that I can find the URL really easily. And by the way, if you didn't notice this, you can click on this icon in the upper right-hand corner of the symbols and emojis box, and you get some more options over on the left. This includes currency symbols if you ever need to look through some of the currency symbols in here. I gave you everything you need, though, so you can just copy and paste it from the exam if you need to. Then below this, we'll make sure we can convert our URL string to a valid URL type with guard let lowercase URL equals uppercase URL. We select the option with the string, and we're going to pass in the string URL string, else open and close curlies. We're going to print out an error with angry emoji. Error, could not create a URL from string interp URL string, but we shouldn't see that because we're using a valid URL. We've got to put the return statement after the print statement. Then once we have a valid URL, we're ready to make that call to URLSession. We do that in a do catch clause, so we'll write that down below. And in the do clause, we'll say let, and then in parentheses, because we're getting a tuple back, data, comma, and we don't care about the result, so we'll put an underscore here. We'll set that equal to, and we've got to use try and await as keywords, because when we type in URLSession.shared.data, and we always use the option from, which takes a URL in here, we can see that this is both async and throws, so we've got to start this with try and await in front of the URL session call. Then we put lowercase URL in here as the value that we pass in to call in URL session and get our data from. That's the URL we just just set up above. Then once we have our data in the data variable, we're ready to try to decode that with guard let, and we'll call this lowercase result equals try question mark, and we say JSON decoder, make sure it's decoder, open and close parens, dot decode, select the option here with the type and the from. So what is the type that we're going to decode from? That's that very topmost struct that we created, capital R result. We always put .self after it. And what are we decoding from? Our lowercase d data value that we got from URLSession in the line above this. Now we need to add else and curlies to the guard statement. Now if this doesn't work out, I'm going to print out an error in between the guard curlies. I'll start by copying off a little bit of this print statement up here and then change it. I'll have this say JSON error : could not decode returned JSON from string interp URL string. Make sure you add a return in between the curlies of the guard statement. But hopefully we will never see that. And now we're ready to get the result out of our various structures and put them in our 3 published properties. So down here we can say USB per BTC equals result.bpi.usd.rateFloat. And we'll do the same thing, GBP per BTC equals result.bpi.gbp.rateFloat. And your per BTC equals result.bpi.your.rateFloat. Now you're also required to print this out to the console, so below we'll say print 1 Bitcoin is currently worth : and we'll do 3 string interps. We'll say $ before the first one and paste in USD per BTC. Then I'll just copy the pound symbol from the exam and paste it in front of a second string interp, which has GBP per BTC inside of it, and I'll do the same for the euro, passing in EUR per BTC in the string interp. Then in the catch, we'll put in an error statement. I'll copy some from above and goof this up a bit, but it should say print error could not use URL at URL string to get data in response. And so this should work. So now let's head over to our content view and make sure that we can call this. Now we're going to call this in the VStack when the VStack appears. So again, we could use .onAppear with capital T task, or even better, we can use .lowercase task, open and close curlies. And in between those curlies, we say await keyword currency VM.getData. Let's unfold, build and run. And down below we see that we've accessed the URL successfully, no errors, 1 Bitcoin is currently worth, and we get the dollar value in dollars, pounds, and euros. So our setup of our ViewModel class, we created an object from that, and we made an appropriate call to get data, and we're getting the JSON from URLSession, parsing that data, and putting it in published values. Good work. Now it's time for part 3, which is calculating the bill total. So first, we're going to calculate the bill in US dollars. We're going to write a function calcBill in currency that will use the various quantity values that were selected from the steppers and the value in the price enum to calculate the total bill. Now the amount returned should be a double, and we want to call this function that returns the value in the bottommost text view. So that's this guy down here in the app. It shows $30 at the right, so this is where we want to have this called. And we also want to format this to do decimal places, and I give you the format string. We've used the format strings before when initializing strings and creating them so that they're going to show with a certain number of decimal points in here. You could use other techniques if you wanted to, but you probably remember the string formatter, and this is how to use it. And at this point, the app should look like the one shown at the right when 3 tacos, 1 burrito, and 1 chips and 2 horchata are selected. That's the $30 meal, which is a standard date night meal. If one of you eats 3 tacos and the other one eats a burrito, and changes to the stepper value should automatically be shown over here on the left as well as down here in the $ area. Then we'll move on to 16 when we're done, but let's get 15 done. So let's add that first function just before the close curly in the content view struct. We'll say func calcBill in currency, open and close parens, arrow, double, since we're returning a double, open and close curlies. And just to silence the error, I'll say return 0.0 with it to do, change this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate the total for all of the order items. So I'll start out creating a constant let taco total equals capital P price.taco.raw value. That's the price of the taco. Then I want to multiply it by the quantity. So star. Now our price enums are already doubles, but our quantity values are going to come back as integers. That's what we get from our stepper. So I'm going to say double and then in parentheses put in taco quantity. Remember, in Swift, we need to make sure that we perform actions on like type. So the first part is a double. We need to convert the second part to a double, and we want to make sure we get our total as a double as well. So we get dollar and cents if there are any cents involved. Then I'll do the same for the remaining values. Let burrito total equals price.burrito.raw value times double in parens burrito quantity. Let chips total equal price.chips.raw value times double chips quantity. And let horchata total equals price.chips.raw value times double in parentheses horchata total. In parentheses, horchata quantity. And if you're eagle-eyed, the line above should have said price.horchata. We'll discover that in just a bit. Then let's create a new constant below. We'll say let USD total, that'll be the total that we have, equals taco total plus burrito total plus chips total plus horchata total. And we can return that value down here, but we need to make sure that we call this function. And I advise you to call it right in the text field, right in the text view where we show the symbol value. So I'm going to highlight the 0.00 in here and instead put in a string interp, calling calc bill in currency. And we now see as we change the values in the stepper that we're definitely getting the value in our lower area of the VStack, the text area here that's got the dollar sign and the bill total. But remember, we want to format this to 2 decimal places. And oops, I'm noticing that my value that I'm calculating it at is a little wrong in here. I used code completion too fast. I've got to change this bottom to price.horchata.raw value, and now things are calculating properly. So now back to changing the value that I return from the function so that it only has 2 decimal places. So I'm going to replace the function call that I have in this string interp here after the symbol, and I'm going to add in string open parens, and I'm going to select the option with the format in here, which is going to take a format string and arguments. So I'll put in for the format just an empty string for now. The argument is going to be the function call that we have because that's going to return a value. So that's what we're going to want to format. So I'll put calc bill in currency in here, always with open and close parens afterward. And the format string is just going to be, and I tell you this right in the test, %2f. And we now see that our value in dollars is formatted to 2 decimal places. We can click and change the quantities, and everything is working perfectly. Nice work. Question solved. So we have the value printing in US dollars. The next question here has us print the value or convert the value to the appropriate currency level. Now, we want to modify, calculate bill in currency to be able to figure out what the value should be in pounds and in euros. And even though we don't have the pound per dollar or euro per dollar exchange rate, what we can do is, since we have the dollar per Bitcoin, the pound per Bitcoin, and the euro per Bitcoin, then we can use these to easily calculate the pound per dollar and euro per dollar rate. Just very basic middle school algebra to make that happen. And at this point, our app should work similarly to what you see below. Your values might be slightly different depending on what the Bitcoin per dollar and pound and euro rate is at this particular point in time, but it should work like this. So let's go ahead and finish this build. This is our second to last question. And I'm going to perform this calculation based on whatever the picker value is. So I'm going to say switch currency selection, because remember that returns the value that's chosen from the picker. And then in between curlies, I'll say my 3 cases, case.usd : case.gbp : and case.eur : No need for a default value in here because we've got all 3 cases. That's the exhaustive number of cases that are possible from our currency enum. And if we're the USD case, we're simply going to return the USD total. No further need for currency conversion. But if the case is the GBP, then what we're going to do is we're going to return USD total times, and in parentheses, we'll say currency VM.GBP per BTC divided by currency VM.USD per BTC. So what this does is it cancels out the Bitcoin value. It gives you the value of pounds per dollar. Multiplying that by the dollar value will convert this value, your total, to Great British pounds. And just to help you along to make sure that you got the math properly, remember, if you took a look at the answer in the question, your value should be very similar to the value you showed. Maybe it changed just a little bit, but I took that screenshot just a few hours before the test was offered. Then down below, we're going to do the same thing for euros. We'll return USD times, and in parentheses, this is going to be currency VM.euro per BTC divided by currency VM.USD per BTC. And since we've got all of our 3 values in the exhaustive cases in here, we don't need this extra return value down below. We'd never reach that. So make sure that's deleted. And now if we build up our order, we can go and see, so what would one burrito be? We can see that we're getting the value in Great British pounds and in euros. And if I change these values, we can see that I automatically see them when whatever currency is selected. So this is working perfectly in here. The values are changing automatically according to whatever currency that I've got. Excellent. We're ready for our last question. So this is question number 17. We want to calculate the bill in Bitcoin. So we should create a function called calcBill in Bitcoin, similar to calcBill in currency. In calcBill in Bitcoin, once we get the value of our bill in Bitcoin, which suggests that we should first get the total in US dollars and then use the dollar per Bitcoin value to get the Bitcoin value. Then we want to put it in the text field that has the Bitcoin symbol next to it. And when we do this, we should see whenever any of the quantities is changed in our picker and our steppers, or when we click on the picker to select the different values, we're always going to see the value in the appropriate currency. We should also note that the Bitcoin value is going to be the same regardless of the currency that we use. So, you'll notice that if we click on the three different options here, the Bitcoin value does not change, but we do see the currency value change. The Bitcoin value should change, however, if we click on any of the different options in the stepper in real time. Now, I say real time here, but we set this up so that the currency value is just when the app is opened. We're going to assume again for this project that that's okay, although certainly you could make an API call every time one of these buttons was changed. I did not ask you to do that for the project. And this is an example of what the working app will look like, so you can compare your answers to see, hey, am I roughly in the ballpark? Or if I'm wildly off, then I probably did my calculations incorrectly. Let's finish this app. So just above my calcBill in currency, I'm going to create another function, func calcBill in Bitcoin. Open and close parens, arrow, double is what I'm returning, open and close curlies. And then just to get done quickly, I'm going to copy the first 5 lines of calcBill in currency. That gives me my US dollar total for whatever is selected in the different stepper values. It would be more professional of me if I broke this out in yet another function, so I'd only have one code to maintain instead of doing the calculation in 2 different places. But for the exam, this is totally fine. So now, once I have these values pasted up here in calcBill in Bitcoin total, I've got my US dollar total, so we just need to convert this to Bitcoin and return it. That value is just going to be return USD total divided by currencyVM.USD per Bitcoin. The US dollars are canceled out. I just get my Bitcoin value. Then I'm going to copy this function name so I can put that in the call in the appropriate text view. That's this guy here where I've got all of the zeros next to the Bitcoin symbol. So I'll put in string interp, paste in my function call. Let's live preview this bad boy, and look at this. As we change the various different values with the steppers, the quantity values, we see the Bitcoin value is changed. When we click on the different currency values, the Bitcoin value, as we expected, remains the same, but we are converting it to the other currencies. The app works great. Hopefully, Swifter, this went well, and you can really celebrate what you learned during our semester of Swift. So we had lots of UI concepts in here. We had concepts where we were working with state variables, with state objects. We had a little bit of ViewModel stuff in there for the MVVM structure. We passed binding values into another view. We did an API call. We parsed JSON. We wrote functions. So if you did well on this, you should feel great. If you didn't do well on this, don't fret, because we do have our no-coder left behind policy where you can retake the test at a 70% total. And of course, my students have their final project that I'm looking forward to seeing their excellent final work at our celebration of final projects for our Swift Student App Showcase. Keep hacking, Swifter. I hope you learned a lot. I had a lot of fun teaching you. Continue to hack.